Confused about gentrification?
Want to learn more about gentrification?
Well, we're here to tell you. First, here's a quick definition. According to dictionary.com, gentrification is the buying and renovation of houses and stores in deteriorated urban neighborhoods by upper or middle income families or individuals, thus improving property values but often displacing low income families and small businesses. And here is what it can look like. Before we get into details, it's important to know the history of gentrification because historical context is important when looking at modern-day gentrification. Actions do not go without some type of response, and unfortunately, for the case of gentrification, historical actions have not led to positive consequences. Redlining and restrictive covenant, a normal aspect of discrimination in the United States in the mid-1900s. Before we get more specific about Austin, here's the difference between redlining and restrictive covenants. Redlining is the practice of denying or limiting financial services to certain neighborhoods based on racial or ethnic composition without regard to the residents' qualifications or creditworthiness. The term redlining refers to the practice of using a red line drawn on a map to display where financial institutions would not invest, just like you see here. A restrictive covenant is a provision in a deed or lease that limits what the owner of the land or lease can do with the property. This pertains to Austin because in 1928, city leaders created the 1928 Master Plan. The 1928 Master Plan called for moving most people of color into the east side of Austin. A big reason for this implementation was because Austin was different than most other cities, and city leaders wanted to continue to uphold this image of an upper middle class. After the master plan was implemented and most people of color were living in the east side, the area was neglected by city leaders for decades, which left it susceptible to gentrification. In the 1990s, 2000s, younger, wealthier workers were looking for places to live close to downtown jobs. Remember as a kid when you would pretend not to listen to someone, or when you kept asking your parents for something and you knew they heard you but would do nothing about it? That's how the residents on the east side felt when they complained in letters about dangerous conditions in their neighborhoods from dilapidated infrastructure or municipal negligence. In 1955, the sewers became so clogged in one east side neighborhood that sewage backed up into the street for days before the city acted. Later in the 1950s, east side residents continued to not have a voice when city officials wanted to make the east side an industrial zone. This plan from 1953 to 1958 inscribed a geography of power and dominance onto the landscape of the east side, with little regard for the community. Although the desire for an industrial zone was never fully implemented on the east side, it continued to disempower east side residents. Having a history of disempowerment on the east side has made it susceptible for the area to be gentrified, which we are seeing today.
So now that you know what gentrification is and how the history of Austin impacted the east side, we can now talk about what aspects might accompany gentrification. Starting with the aspect of culture. When an area is becoming gentrified, a lot of culture is displaced. This means that certain symbols within a community like murals, restaurants, or stores that represent a certain culture are taken away. For example, in a San Francisco neighborhood that underwent gentrification, the city literally washed away some of the cultural murals off the walls. And to make up for the cultural symbolism that was washed away, the city just put up a few plaques to remember the culture that used to be there, which is very sad. This picture is of that San Francisco city. To help envision this more, imagine your hometown and all the important symbolism and culture that makes your hometown feel like home. Now imagine when you go back home and all that special culture you've grown up with has vanished. To the families and people who used to or are living in these gentrifying neighborhoods, the neighborhood doesn't feel like home anymore. The old residents who are still left also don't feel like they are welcomed in their own neighborhood because they see services being provided more for the new residents and not to them, such as these businesses. However, the newer residents will most likely feel more welcome in a gentrified neighborhood because they are more interested in the events going on, like art shows, music festivals, or other businesses that appeal to them. As a gentrified neighborhood loses its culture, it is easy for older residents to see a shift in the increase of costs throughout the community. Old businesses begin to shut down, and new businesses move in that are targeting a wealthier crowd. Older residents of the community, most likely low-income minorities, cannot afford the types of products the new businesses are selling. They also view the products as luxury items. Examples include organic fair trade coffee shops, specialty stores, boutiques, and high-end restaurants. The new residents or visitors are attracted to the gentrified area now because they most likely can afford the wealthier businesses. So economically, the gentrified area will have a big influx of wealth because of the rise in cost of property taxes on homes and the amount of money being spent at new businesses. Here's a short clip of a local resident in San Francisco observing the changes in his neighborhood he grew up in.
Family was renting it for about $800. Got sold for about 1.3 million or something like that. My name's Kai. I'm a 20-year-old native from the Mission District. This is where we are right now, Mission District, San Francisco, California, Bay Area, United States. The mission for me, the mission is home for me, cultural center of my influences. You know, a lot of places in the country that I've traveled and in the world are very segregated, not only race-wise, but also class-wise. And I feel like that's something that's very special about the city, is this melting pot of everything. The wealth is directly related to people's displacement from their homes, and that's what happened to me and my family. My family was evicted twice, once in 2005 from the Mission District and once in 2008 from the Richmond District. That's your kitchen, living room. It's funny, this bar, it's like a really hipster bar now. I guess it used to be like a motorcycle bar, and I remember like going to bed and to like basically the sound of engines, and I'm just like, ah. So I'm not really affected by noise too much. That was my bedroom window. This corner is completely different though. This used to be a Latino bakery called Mi Rancho, where everyone in the neighborhood used to come, and now it's luxury condos as well, and a luxury salon, which is, that's just the way it is, I guess.
As you can see, there are many high-end restaurants and other businesses in the San Francisco neighborhood than there were before the neighborhood was gentrified. Jessica and I got feedback from a local Austin restaurant that has been serving Mexican food on the east side for over 50 years. The owner of the restaurant, El Azteca, sees the increase in community costs as a good and bad thing. He told us his property taxes has doubled in the last year, which negatively affects his business, and he believes he might have to move eventually if they continue to increase. However, he said the influx of people has helped increase revenue at the restaurant. Along with cultural and economic shifts that accompany gentrification, there are racial changes that are seen in gentrified neighborhoods. As the neighborhood is undergoing these shifts, the demographics change to predominantly Caucasian residents over colored residents. The older residents that are still living in the neighborhood are more likely to experience racial bias and discrimination as more Caucasian residents move in. We can verify this experience by the residents of a gentrified city in Portland, Oregon. Older residents of this gentrified neighborhood discussed examples of times they felt excluded. For example, one of the residents said she has noticed white mothers clenching their child's hand when she walks by, and that new white residents often do not make eye contact with her. Other experiences included residents not feeling welcomed because new services had entered the neighborhood, like taxi cabs, when taxi cabs were never in the neighborhood to serve the older residents before. Older residents also feel excluded from new events going on in the neighborhood because they do not feel welcomed. In Portland, Oregon, sociology researchers concluded that blacks participated less and the monthly art festivals because they felt uncomfortable and unwelcomed. When gentrification starts to happen to a neighborhood, someone can observe the racial changes by noticing how many colored people attend the new local music events or art festivals. Or someone can observe the racial changes by talking to new residents about how excluded or included they feel in the neighborhood. Caucasian residents who are new to these neighborhoods do not generally see the racial exclusion because of the privilege they have, or they just don't want to recognize it.
Now, I know some of you guys may be thinking, what in the world can be done to make old and new residents of gentrifying neighborhoods connect and communicate? Well, we have come up with some strategies from our research, and one of the strategies is having cultural nights on the east side of Austin.
Portland, Oregon has an art festival every month called Last Thursdays, and Austin has art and boutique festival every first Thursday of the month off SoCo. These festivals are targeted towards a wealthier crowd while excluding low-income residents. Using these festival examples, a strategy for maintaining the culture of East Austin could be having a cultural night every first Saturday of the month that represents the Hispanic and African American cultures. This festival would make sure old residents could participate and sell items that are important to their culture, whether it be food, art, crafts, or having bands play. Why not preserve the culture on the east side by having the residents who have been there forever promote their culture?
Another possible strategy to help old and new residents in a gentrified area would be to have monthly neighborhood talks. Again, Portland, Oregon already has something similar to this implemented in their own gentrified neighborhood known as the Alberta neighborhood. The talks consist of old and new residents, but the older residents are usually the ones telling their stories. Some new residents get defensive and don't really understand what older residents have to say. However, some newer residents have a positive experience and want to learn more on how to help older residents who don't feel comfortable or welcome anymore. The neighborhood talks we are proposing are similar to this and would allow for older residents who still live on the east side to feel like they had a say in what happens in their neighborhood. It would also allow for newer residents to learn and hear about past traditions in the neighborhood and feelings of older residents.
One last simple but individual strategy old and new residents can practice is mindfulness. This practice will help eliminate the unconscious biases we have in our mind, thus helping the new and old residents communicate and connect more efficiently. A reason why new residents may come off as discriminatory towards certain races in a gentrified neighborhood is because of a term called priming. This term means that what is going on in someone's unconscious mind about a certain race is based on the exposure they have seen on the media. So practicing mindfulness is simply noticing your current thoughts in a moment. For example, have you ever locked your car while sitting at a red light after a particular person walked by? Have you ever stopped to think why you did that? Well, if you did, that is practicing mindfulness. By simply noticing our unconscious bias, it helps us manage how much it controls our behavior.
We hope you now have a better understanding of what gentrification is, the history of it, what is affected by it, and possible strategies to help improve communications in these changing neighborhoods. However, if you're still confused about gentrification, or maybe just curious, go take a drive over to the east side and see what it looks like for yourself.